Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
What's up, what's down, what is going on around? This is Startup Taiwan Foreigners Business Guide. I'm Paulo Leasing, founder of MillionDC.com. This YouTube channel and podcast are offshoot of my book, Startup Taiwan Foreigners Business Guide, aimed at helping foreigners start their business here in Taiwan. So leave those questions in the comment section below. Enough about me. Let me talk about our very special guest, Professor Karen Chung from the US. Professor has been in Taiwan for more than 30 years and has so far devoted most of her time as a professor at the National Taiwan University. Professor Karen teaches English, linguistics, and phonetics with specializations in English listening skills, pronunciation, and poetry. She also co-hosts an English teaching radio program called Ivy League Analytical English. Professor Karen speaks English, Mandarin Chinese, German, and Spanish. Professor Chung finished her BA in East Asian Languages from the University of Minnesota, MA in East Asian Studies from Princeton University, and PhD in Linguistics from Leiden University. Professor, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
First question, what's your Taiwan connection? How did you get in here?
Well, I was always interested in languages because of my father. He spoke to me in German when I was little. And then I started studying other languages in high school. Actually, we had German in school as well, which was unusual for the US. But then I went on to French and Spanish. And my mentor one year sent me to Mexico, but I still hadn't found my language until one summer. I took a course in Chinese studies. That was the year that Nixon visited China with the ping pong team. And I had found my language. I knew that Chinese was my language. So I started studying it after that and majored in it. And then wanted to come to Taiwan to study. At the time, the PRC was only open to Americans for short visits, and there was like a one-year waiting list. So Taiwan was where I came, and I continued my studies in Chinese.
Okay, I always thought that you're the best resource person to talk about the government's plan to make Taiwan a bilingual country. That is speaking in Mandarin and English by 2030. And so far, we are less than 9 years from it. Do you think this plan is still possible or attainable?
I think that we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves here by even asking this question of making Taiwan into a bilingual country. Well, it already is multilingual with all its dialects and native languages and so forth. But first of all, Taiwan does not have an official language in the first place. To say that English is going to be a second official language is a mistake from the beginning because we don't have a first official language. Mandarin is widely spoken, but it's not actually legally an official language. A second is, before we say we're going to do this and we're going to do that, we're going to use legislation to make English another official language. We first have to ask ourselves, what's a good way to learn English? Normally in education, we don't use legislation. We don't use laws with punishments and everything else to teach people. The first step is education. And I think that step has largely been missed in this whole process.
Wow. So so if I may reword it a bit, are you saying that there are specific steps that the government needs to undertake before realizing that Taiwan could, at least the Taiwanese could speak the English language, regardless of whether this is an official language or not? Because so far that I have been here in Taiwan, I have met a lot of Taiwanese who actually speaks good English.
That's good. Yeah, it's getting better and better, I think, especially since Taiwan is internationalizing more and people are having more contact with foreigners, and it's kind of pushing them to practice. And then there's the internet that has all helped, but we are still missing a big step. It's sort of like saying, I have set a goal that by the year 2030, I am going to build a skyscraper. Now, is that realistic? Am I going to make my goal? Well, first of all, I'd better take a course in architecture and engineering. I don't have those. How am I going to build a building if I haven't taken architecture and engineering and math and everything else? So the steps you need to get there, before you say, I'm going to do this, you have to figure out, well, how am I going to do this? And that's pretty much missing. So I will jump ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think if I've read some of the steps that are the steps that they would undertake, it includes having English TV shows, so that it's going to be so that so that people will be comfortable with listening and and watching English TV shows, and so that it would also be used in normal conversations. Do you think this is enough as well?
Well, I think we already have more English television shows than we could watch in 15 lifetimes. Anybody who has Netflix, you have as much English TV as you want. And you don't even need Netflix. If you don't want to spend money, you go to YouTube. There's so much English there that, you could never, ever even scratch the surface. So that is not really the point. I'll add another point. I don't have a TV. A lot of people don't even have TVs anymore, just like they don't have landline telephones anymore. It's kind of old technology. So that's also starting from the wrong end. In Chinese, they say 本末倒置. They start from the end and try to get back to the beginning of what they were supposed to do. I will just give away sort of like the whole point of what I'm kind of dancing around right now. And that is the one thing that's missing from English education is listening. We have almost no listening training at all. And it's funny because if you ask any Taiwanese or any Chinese speaker, imagine now that you were teaching a foreigner Chinese. How are you going to do it? Are you going to whip out a book and say, here, look, these are the 4 tones, read them to me? And then they all laugh. They say, of course not. I said, well, then what would you do? They said, well, I would pronounce each word clearly, ma, 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 ma. And then I would have the student repeat after me. I go, right. Why don't you do that for English? Do you think that Chinese is so special and so different that you only need to use listening to learn Chinese? You don't need it to learn English? Every language actually is pretty much the same. You start with listening. If you don't have that sound in your head, you have no sense of what is correct. You will put together some crazy sentences from your knowledge of grammar and vocabulary. My example from Chinese is usually, 我的衣服穿的里头在外头. Like my clothes, I have worn them with the inside out, which makes sense in English, but that's not how you say it in Chinese. It's 我的衣服穿反了. So if you are just putting together your own sentences from the bits and pieces that you have memorized by heart for the test, you're going to put together crazy sentences that no English speaker is going to understand, at least without a lot of thinking. In addition, our brain has 2 systems. We have system 1 and system 2. System 1 is the unconscious brain that does things automatically, like getting up and brushing your teeth and getting dressed. We don't think much about it. System 2 is your calculus brain, and that requires a lot of conscious effort. And after you've done about half an hour of calculus, Paolo, how do you feel?
Oh, it's going to be tiring, I suppose.
Yeah, you feel pretty exhausted because whenever we're using our analytical conscious brain, it uses up a lot of brain resources and it's exhausting and it is not fast. It's careful and it can be very precise and logical, but it is very slow and it takes up lots and lots of energy. And basically the way English is taught in Taiwan, students are taught to use this very, very resource hogging system 2 to try to speak a language without having had enough sounds in their ears to know what sounds correct. They just put things together by pure logic, and the logical brain is slow and it doesn't have good sounds backing it up. That's basically the problem here as I see it.
So I think you mentioned already my next question, which is an observation that many Taiwanese are actually very good at taking English exams, especially for those who wanted to go abroad for their for further studies. And there's actually a data to back this up. And I think what you're trying to say is that to bridge this being good at taking exams into making more Taiwanese speak the language is being able to integrate the listening skills into the system. But I'm still a little bit confused on how you could do this. Does this mean we need to add this specific training in the whole English language learning curriculum in the schools?
Short answer, yes. But I think we need to back up still further. And that is, before you undertake anything in life, you have to figure out what your goal is. And if you want to learn any skill, like if you want to take up the violin, why are you taking up the violin? Do you want to become a concert violinist, or is it just a hobby? Or do you want to play with some friends because they also do music? You have to decide ahead of time, what is your goal in doing this? Is your goal to pass the test? Is your goal to chat with friends on the internet? Is your goal to go abroad to study? Depending on your goal, you're going to take completely different approaches to studying. If your goal is to pass the test, and I would say that in a huge majority of cases in Taiwan, people mostly learn English in order to pass the test, in order to not fail their classes in school. Once your goal is set as passing the test, okay, so you take your test for senior high school, you take your test for university, you're in, you're done. You don't have to work on your English anymore because you've accomplished your goal, it's behind you. And no part of that goal was to really communicate orally with other English speakers, native or non-native. Since that was not part of your goal, of course, you can't do it. You spent your study time studying scores for Beethoven's Midnight Sonata. You keep studying the sheet music, you read it every day. And then you jump into an orchestra and you can't play it. And you're shocked. Why can't I play this? Well, you've never practiced. So it's perfectly obvious, number one, if you've got to set your goal. And depending on your goal, you're going to approach it differently. The approach that's being used now is okay for the kind of test that's given here in order to pass the test and then be done with English. But in order to live abroad, you're going to have to sit down and practice your piano every day, or you're not going to be able to play the sonata. That much is clear. And then I'll go on to the second part of your question, and that is, do we have to really change what we're doing? The answer is obviously yes. You cannot expect to keep on doing the same thing you've been doing for decades and decades and decades. This goes back to certainly before the Chinese retaking of Taiwan, back to the Japanese occupation period. The methods that have been used since then have basically not changed. You sit down and learn things from a textbook. And very often, first of all, it's because the tests don't require anything else. Second, the teachers themselves are not comfortable with doing oral work and listening. So they pass on, they're actually quite afraid of it. And they pass this fear on to their students. So anytime there's anything having to do with listening or speaking, the students go like, ah, and they will say, oh, my listening is very poor. And that's a very poor excuse. Nobody is born with poor listening. All that is going on is you haven't practiced. Why haven't you practiced? Well, I'm sorry, it goes back to the way we're teaching. And very specifically, you said, do we have to change? Yes. And my suggestion, and I've written about it in several articles, is for every class period, which is usually 50 minutes, 10 minutes of it should be devoted to listening practice. You listen, and you repeat, and you practice also speaking. Doesn't matter, what level, who's teaching it, whether the English teacher's English is really good or not, it doesn't matter. You just have 10 minutes of every single class hour where you are practicing listening. And if we do that, starting from tomorrow, Taiwan's English will become better immediately, I can promise.
Wow. So somehow related to what you just mentioned, back home, I've encountered a lot of people who would actually correct people's grammar. I've experienced this personally, that mid-sentence people would cut me and say, oh, that's not the right grammar. But also living abroad, I realized that grammar sometimes is not the most important thing, because some people are really super smart, but their English is not as good in terms of grammar. But I could understand them, but many people would always say the most brilliant suggestions, brilliant concepts, but even though their English is not, the best. Would you say that, as Taiwan wants to achieve a certain level of English fluency, is grammar important?
Yes, of course, grammar is important. But I will clarify it a bit. You need to know the basic rules of grammar. In Taiwan, it usually goes into really, really detailed exceptions, and that's the wrong thing to do. You should learn the rules of grammar, because unless you can generalize, you're just going to keep on trying different things and nothing works. So trial and error takes a lot of time and energy, but if you simply learn the rule, then you know what's going on. So yes, grammar is important. But the question is, how much time do we devote to grammar, and how much time do we devote to something else? And basically, I go by the Pareto principle, which says 20% of effort, and then you can actually takes care of 80% of the cases. But in this case, it's 20% of effort spent on grammar, 80% spent on listening and speaking, actually using the language. So of course you learn the rules, but don't spend too much time on it. Put most of your effort into speaking. And if you have reset your goal to want to actually communicate with people, say online, which is so easy now. It's very easy to find people, for example, who want to learn Chinese. You can set up a language exchange. So you can find all kinds of ways to actually start speaking. And if you have the chance to actually interact with a human, I think a lot of us are finding now that we actually really crave interactions with other people. You're the first person I've talked to today, by the way. We really crave that. And if we have the chance to use language to communicate better with somebody else, that gives us a huge motivation. Our goal has now changed from passing the test to connecting with another human being and feeling really happy about it. So if we put our emphasis on use, on listening, understanding, practice, okay, here's the next thing, is you cannot expect to just do 2 hours of English a week, maybe 2 to 3 hours, I don't know, it depends on the program, and expect to get results from that is just not going to happen. Once your goal is to actually learn it well, you'll want to work on it to get better. Sticking at it too long, you'll get exhausted. So just do 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, but do it every single day. As long as you work on it every single day, you're going to keep on progressing. And you will be surprised at how much you can progress just by doing a little every day. And there's this saying that goes around that people always overestimate what they can accomplish in a day or in a year, but they underestimate what they can accomplish in a few years or 10 years. You'll get a lot done. So if you do that little bit every day, it's always on your mind. Every day you're improving just a little bit. This concept is called kaizen. In Chinese, it's 改善. That means doing a little bit every day to improve. You would improve really fast and not spend all your time looking at grammar, but you're spending your time actually listening and actually communicating with other people, maybe finding a pen pal, whatever it is you do.
Did you, so far, in the span that you've been here in Taiwan, do you think that Taiwan made a significant progress in terms of the ability of many Taiwanese to speak English?
I think because of the internet, we are now more open to connecting with people outside of our bubble or outside of our country, outside of our culture. So people are getting a bit braver. And if you get braver, that means you practice more. If you practice more, you will get better. I think for that reason, it has been improving. For example, in my classes at Taiwan University, students are more likely to raise their hand and participate, although not everybody does still. They're more willing to share what they think, less afraid of expressing, ideas or getting criticized by others, but it's still a problem here. But in any case, I think getting kind of past a lot of this shyness is really making the difference. As for the teaching methods, frankly, I do not see a lot of change. Yeah, it's really up to the students. If they can get over their shyness and get out and practice, they will improve. We can see the difference there. But as for the education system itself, I have not seen that much change. This is just my observation.
Okay. Let me go back to your experience when you first came to Taiwan. Based on on the statistics back then, maybe less than 500,000 foreigners were in Taiwan. How did you survive?
Oh, it was no problem at all. So first of all, as I mentioned, in high school, my mentor sent me to Mexico. And the first time I set foot in Taiwan, I thought it looked a lot like Mexico. There were the buildings and the roads. A lot of it was just so similar to Mexico, and that made me kind of feel comfortable. But in addition, I had already interacted with Taiwanese friends in Minnesota for years, and that's how I learned Mandarin before I came here. If I hadn't learned Mandarin first, I think I would have had a much harder time. But thanks to these very dear and very patient and very knowledgeable people who were willing to correct my Chinese and teach me things, I was able to speak before I came to Taiwan, and that made things a lot easier. So from that point of view, I don't think I felt much culture shock.
Okay. As a foreigner, can you think of some ways you think that some ways or some rules by the government to help the lives of the foreigners here in Taiwan? Or do you think what we have in place right now is enough or is good already?
Well, there's one thing that really bugs me, and that is this apartment where I live, I own it. It's in my name. But I am not in the household registration system. So if ever there's something that requires a household registration, my name is not on it. They call this a yoling hu, except my daughter is registered here. She's in the States, but she's registered there because she has dual citizenship. Why, if I can own an apartment, is my name not in the household registry? To me, I think that's outrageous. So think of how many foreigners there are now in Taiwan, so many of us, and I have permanent residency. Permanent residency means I may never leave this island again. There's a possibility that may happen with the pandemic and everything. And yet, even so, I'm not in the household registry. What is the point of that? So number one is we need to reform the household registration system. And as for like benefits, I just retired. So any benefits there are for people my age and over, they do not go to anybody without a household registration. So for example, getting a cheaper bus ticket or MRT ticket, which doesn't matter, it's not a lot of money, but you just feel like you've been pushed out. And so number one, I mean, that is a very, very basic level of government, is fix the household registration system, include foreigners.
And I guess that will also be, fixing this issue would also allow many foreigners to really think of staying here. For example, in some of my private discussions with some people people who are trying to think of Taiwan as a place to retire. And I guess if they learn about these existing rules, I guess it will fend them off from pushing through with this, with their plans.
Well, I think it's still doable. Now, you cannot control the bureaucracy of every country you go to, right? It just differs so much according to country. You kind of have to just figure out how to work with it and work around it. Of course, I would say, please come, because Taiwan is such a wonderful place, and the more the merrier. But this one needs to be fixed along with citizenship. Now, I'm sure you're aware of this issue. It's been discussed a lot. I would really like to get Taiwan citizenship without renouncing my US citizenship. Now, that is now possible for my category of work. Although I'm retired, I can still apply as somebody who is technically trained or has a certain high-level workers from being a university professor. I would like to do that, but for most people, that avenue is not open. And even if you apply, there's no guarantee you will be accepted, although in fact, most of my friends who've gone through it have. But it is very difficult, and it's only available to certain groups of people. If you're in high tech or some maybe, I don't know, entertainers, there's certain groups of people that are available or that are eligible for this. That actually should be, I think, opened up a lot more, make it easier. It shouldn't be extremely easy because you need to show your commitment, but you need to make it doable, and not just for a very few groups of people that are kind of arbitrarily selected.
Okay, let's do a fast round. So basically, you just have to tell me what comes to your mind when I mention all these quick questions. Are you ready?
Sure.
What's your daily breakfast?
Fruit and nuts and a latte.
Wow. The show that you're currently watching on Netflix or HBO?
Actually, I don't have Netflix, but I do have the full DVD collection of The Twilight Zone. I'm now watching the original Twilight Zone from the 60s.
Wow.
In black and white.
Okay. Are you a morning or night person?
Very much morning.
Are you an Android or iOS person? Sorry, my cat
iOS.
To get my attention. Do you play games, either computer games or board games?
I'm really interested in games, and actually I've joined a couple of game designer groups on Facebook, and I listen to game designer podcasts. That's because I kind of want to work in the direction of developing English materials that are gamified. So actually I'm into it, but to tell you the truth, there's one game that I play a lot when I'm vegging out, when my brain can't do anything else, and that is Spider Solitaire.
Oh, yeah, okay. What is your favorite movie of all time?
That's really hard to say. I don't know if it's the very favorite, but there's a movie I really like. It's Groundhog Day.
Okay. Favorite book or books?
There are a lot of, I would say the one that I'm reading now, I'm reading an 8-volume set of, it's called Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. The Chinese is Liao Zhai Zhi Yi by Pu Songling of the Qing Dynasty of the 1600s. It's a collection of tales of the supernatural. It is my very, very favorite book of all.
Okay. I think that's the last of the fast round. So finally, let's talk about your action items. How do you think we could help you, and what are your plans?
Well, I think something that we've already covered is get the message through to anybody who can influence education. Is we need to start with listening. Institute listening in every single English class. We're going to fix a lot of problems there. Now, as for helping other foreigners, actually, if the kids start out with a better basis in English, it'll be a lot easier to teach them English. A lot of people are teaching English. There's another point that's not specifically about foreigners, but it's something that I noticed in the 70s when I was a student, and it still has not been fixed. This affects everybody, not just foreigners, and that is sidewalks. Have you noticed that on some streets, there is no sidewalk, there's no place to walk, there's a very, very busy street, and then there is a tianmian, there's a store, and then you have to be careful not to get hit. I wish that there were sidewalks on both sides of every street.
And the fact that the quote unquote existing sidewalks that we have here are all tiled, so that when it rains, it's really slippery. That's so scary to walk on.
Yes, it can be slippery. And then if you step on the wrong tile, it squishes and squirts you with mud.
Oh, okay. That's not good. Well, that's the final question that I have, and I really want to thank you, Professor, for lending us your time for this show. So, if for all our audience, if you have any questions, if you want to get to know more about Professor, I'm going to leave some of our contacts in the description below. So until next time, have a good day.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.